stories. Russia, along with China and Lebanon, have blocked efforts by the U.S. and a number of European nations seeking a UN Security Council resolution on Syria over its violent crackdown on demonstrators. Moscow is opposed to an international intervention, believing it could spark civil war. But Washington and European allies want strong measures if Damascus continues to ignore appeals to end the bloodshed. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has faced an international outcry after bringing in troops and tanks to quell unrest, killing hundreds across the country. But Moscow believes foreign interference in the conflict could do more harm than good, making the opposition reliant on foreign help. Meanwhile, Syria's neighbor Israel fears the U.S. role in the recent unrest in the Arab world could backfire by boosting extremists in the region. RT's Paula Sleer has more from Tel Aviv.
These gunmen mean business, and they're upping the stakes just that little bit higher.
All these years, the Egyptian regime, like the Zionist enemy, tried to stop us fighters in Gaza. But we always got the weapons we needed to fight the Zionist enemy.
And now they're getting more than they could ever hope for. With former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak's men gone, the borders couldn't be easier to get through.
Today, the Bedouins in Sinai Desert, who were those who smuggled the arms to Gaza, have much more freedom to do whatever they like.
And they're doing it, smuggling weapons into Gaza. The result? 2 attacks in 3 months on a natural gas pipeline that supplies a quarter of Israel's electricity. Which is why, as the US claims it's bringing a new tomorrow to Egypt, most Israelis would rather remember yesteryear. The eagerness of the United States to topple the former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak and bring about regime change has ironically most harmed its closest ally in the region, Israel. The US says it wants to establish democracy in the region, but instead of democracy, there's a very real possibility that radical Islamists could come to power. The US strongly supported the opposition in Libya, despite al-Qaeda connections among its ranks. Now it's apparently galvanizing support against Syrian President Bashar Assad, with the WikiLeaks website claiming that Washington has been funding some anti-government factions.
Everybody's afraid that if he goes away, the Muslim Brotherhood can take Syria. So instead of an infidel regime in Syria, we're going to have an Islamist regime.
Swapping one dictator for what could be worse. If and when radicals come to power, they're likely to direct their arms at Israel.
People will be very conscious of the fact that Syria is not Libya, and the fact that if you do decide to intervene in Syria, you will have knock-on effects across the region, in Iraq, in Lebanon, to Israel-Palestine.
Whatever new threats Israel might face from an even more hostile Arab world emerging from the present instability, some experts believe the security of the Jewish state is not under any grave threat.
Israel has never been an unsafe place. One of the greatest lies, the mother and father of all lies as it relates to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, is that Israel has been in danger of annihilation. I detail in the 3 volumes of my book, it is a complete lie. Israel's existence has never ever been in danger from any combination of Arab military force, and that is unlikely to change in any foreseeable future.
But the fighters on the ground aren't giving up hope, and their ominous warning is that there's worse to come.
The time of defeat and retreat is over. Now it's time for the Israeli people and the Israeli enemy to pay.
Israel is keeping quiet amid the current chaos in the Middle East and North Africa. But behind closed doors, there'll be plenty of disquiet here about how much America's desire to make new friends in the Arab world is fueling serious instability. Paula Sleer, RT, Tel Aviv.
And further on in the program, you can see a full interview with veteran British Middle East reporter Alan Hart, who you've just heard from in that report. Stay tuned for his expert insight on events in the Arab world later this hour. Meanwhile, writer William Engdahl says the Libyan experience has shown how a sovereign state can be attacked under the guise of protecting civilians.
Well, if you look at what the U.S. did to engineer the UN resolution on Libya, this is one of the most brazen transgressions of rights of nation, national sovereignty, and international law that we've seen in the post-World War II period. The responsibility to protect is an insidious doctrine that's been developed by various NGO think tanks connected with circles in the United States to justify a NATO definition of an intervention in a sovereign country. There's been no attempt to have a peaceful conflict resolution before this thing escalated. In fact, rather, the West, the US, France, and Britain have been covertly, according to the evidence that's leaking out, covertly arming the opposition to Gaddafi in hopes of grabbing control of the oil in the different parts of Libya. Fortunately, this time, Russia and China are playing a reasonable role in blocking any UN Security Council sanction for strong measures against Syria. So I think they learned from their deadly mistake on the Libya case when they abstained that this thing has no end if it's allowed to pass.
We also spoke to journalist Arun Gupta, who says Russia and China fear the Syrian conflict could descend into civil war if there's foreign intervention like in Libya.
Russia and China are taking a more proactive role because they're not happy with what's going on in Libya. I think they stood aside because they didn't see it, one, generally in their interests to block the Security Council resolution. I think part of the reason there's a lot more opposition is because Libya is turning out to be disastrous. It's turning into a civil war, which is the deadliest, most destructive form of conflict there is, pretty much outside of nuclear war. So I think that's why no one on the Security Council really wants to see another military intervention.
And back in Washington, Barack